if the US and the UK continue to retaliate, at some point Iran will have to decide, do we step in to retaliate against the US and the UK?
Ministers will announce one of Britain's largest troop deployments to NATO today as Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, warns the conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East have shaken the foundations of the world order to their core. In what will be Britain's biggest land mobilisation to NATO in 40 years, 20,000 military personnel will be deployed from next month across Eastern Europe. Over the weekend, the US and the UK warned they will attack Houthi targets again if the Iran-backed rebels keep targeting commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea. President Biden says it's well prepared for further action, whilst Lord Cameron says Britain is ready to back words with actions.
The escalation has been caused by the Houthis. I mean, the point is, since the 19th of November, you've had these 26 attacks. There have been more of them. They've been getting worse. And, not acting is also a policy, and it's a policy that doesn't work. We've seen the escalation take place. So what we're doing is saying, your actions have a consequence. We've given these warnings. We've very much treated military action as a last resort. The strikes themselves were limited, proportionate, targeted, legal, but they were also necessary.
It's the Foreign Secretary David Cameron speaking yesterday. Elisabeth Braw is a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and joins us live from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Elisabeth.
Good morning.
Let's start with the situation in the Red Sea. Is there any sign now of the Houthis heeding these warnings?
No, there isn't. And in fact, it looks like they are enjoying themselves, or they are achieving exactly the sort of a situation that they wanted to achieve. They are in the middle of the global attention. They are getting the US to respond, the UK to respond. We're all talking about them. They are affecting global trade, which is their opportunity to be part of the global conversation. And the US and the UK and the other members of the Western Alliance are trying to counter them, are not getting anywhere.
So if they're not heeding these warnings from the US and the UK, who will they listen to? Does it fundamentally come down to conversations that presumably are happening between Washington and Iran?
It looks like it, but we should also remember that it's completely unclear how Iran views all of this. We don't know whether Iran was the instigator of these attacks or whether the Houthis thought up the first attack themselves and then let the Iranians know. But either way, Iran is their sponsor, as it were, their state sponsor. And if the US and the UK continue to retaliate, at some point Iran will have to decide, do we step in to retaliate against the US and the UK? And we know that Joe Biden has sent a private message to the Iranian leadership to presumably advise them not to step in. But all of this is completely up in the air as we speak. We don't know how the Iranian thinking is going at the moment or where it's moving. What we do know is that the attacks are continuing and that global shipping is continuing to suffer. And as a result, the globalized economy is continuing to suffer.
And of course, the Houthis would say they are waging this campaign in the Red Sea in solidarity with people in Palestine and in opposition to Israel's war in Gaza. Do you think, though, there is any prospect of America pushing for a ceasefire? Because will that not just be seen as sort of giving in to the Houthi demands?
The Houthis have been so clever throughout this whole campaign. First, the whole idea of attacking merchant vessels, and they are not even very successful with their attacks, but they're successful in frightening global shipping lines, and as a result, Western governments have to step in. That's the first part that's been successful. The second part that's been successful is that they've been managed to cloak this whole campaign of attacks against merchant vessels in some sort of ideological guise where they're fighting on behalf of the Palestinians. I don't think they care much or they pay much attention to the Palestinians. It was just a convenient cause to adopt. So it doesn't look just like maritime privacy. It looks like an ideological campaign or a brave campaign for the Palestinians. And that then puts the American and British intervention very much in that guise as well. Now it looks like the US and the UK are intervening on Israel's side, or at least the Houthis will be able to portray it that way, which will raise anger against the US and the UK in particular in the Middle East.
Just finally, Elisabeth, I wanted to ask you about the story on the front of the Times today. Ministers are expected to announce one of Britain's largest troop deployments to NATO. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, warning that the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East have shaken the foundations of the world order to their core. It's expected to be Britain's biggest land mobilisation to NATO in 40 years. 20,000 military personnel will be deployed from next month across Eastern Europe. What are we to make of that?
It's the UK stepping up to its responsibility within NATO, and it is the de facto number 2 nation within NATO, even though Germany is larger. And it's a significant statement vis-a-vis Russia. But I think, James, what the sort of collision that's heading our way is defense receiving more funds, more attention, and potentially a lot more funds as a result of the situation. While on the other hand, people up and down the country are saying, well, things are not being repaired here, the NHS is in dire straits and so forth. And the UK has a long-standing tradition of being a major military power, but that tradition dates back to a time when the UK was a lot larger and obviously had the Commonwealth and the Empire. Today, the UK is, as we all know, a mid-sized power, and maybe its military stature is too big for a country of this size. Or on the other hand, is it the UK's calling card in the world? That is a conversation that will need to be had, because the UK is already spending more on defense than many other countries its size, and will potentially spend a lot more. And the question is, whether voters agree with that, don't agree with it, but I think the conversation needs to be had.
Elisabeth, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Elisabeth Braw there, columnist for Foreign Policy magazine and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council.